Well, welcome back to another segment of Beyond the Grassy Knoll. And we have with us today Dave McGowan. He's been on before, but this theme to which he's going to speak is much different than the last he shared with us back probably over a year ago. He has really gotten a lot of attention out of folks with this last series about which we will speak, and it's entitled, by Dave, Inside the LC, the strange but mostly true story of Laurel Canyon and the birth of the hippie generation. And I won't tell you I had a ringside seat for that. I was on a field playing, Dave. So, welcome to the Grassy Knoll, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me on. It's good to be back. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been, and thanks for coming. And hopefully we can do a couple of shows with this, because just as you've said yourself, this topic, it is labyrinthine. I mean, it just goes all over the place. And we've had that kind of same feeling with Adam Gorightly and Andy Colvin with what they've covered. It is absolutely fascinating, and you think it's over, and it's not over by any means. And that's exactly what you're dealing with right now. Now, the series is just 4 parts long, but what would you guess might be a ballpark number of parts that this could turn out to be?
I'm guessing probably a dozen at this point, but it's very much a work in progress. I'm still actively doing research and still updating my notes, and I mean, I just have tons and just pages and pages and pages of raw notes that I somehow or other have to try to shape into the remainder of this story. It's hard to say at this point, but I would guess that it'll probably run at least 12 installments.
Now, pardon the pun, but would you consider Laurel Canyon the epicenter of something?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It was definitely the epicenter of something. Exactly what, I don't know. And which I got to say came as quite a surprise to me, actually, because I don't know if you know this, but I could walk out the door right now and get in my car and be in the very heart of Laurel Canyon in like 15 minutes from my front door. And I've lived within a half an hour of it my entire life here in the LA area, and I've actively been researching this kind of stuff for I don't know, a good 10, 15 years, and yet I knew nothing about this place or the significance of it up until like a year or two ago. I knew absolutely nothing about it, and yet here it is right in my own backyard, and completely unknown to me and to just about everybody else in the quote-unquote conspiracy community. It's known to some degree to people that are real hardcore rock and roll aficionados that really followed this stuff through the 60s and whatnot. But the importance of it is not generally known at all. I mean, I drive through. I've been driving through it all my life to get to work. It's an easy way to get from the valley into the west side of LA. Either Laurel Canyon, Coldwater, and whatnot. And I've been driving through it off and on my whole life, and yet never had a clue that there was any special significance or any special history that this place had.
Let me just ask you, with using the Hollywood Bowl as a reference point, where is Laurel Canyon in reference to that?
For the Hollywood Bowl?
Yeah, anywhere near it?
Kind of, sort of. It sits right above the Sunset Strip, what is known as the Sunset Strip, which is the section of Sunset Boulevard that used to be sort of an unincorporated strip that was like speakeasies and brothels and whatnot, and then later became this big club scene. But it sits basically right above West Hollywood, West LA area, and from the north it empties out into like Studio City, North Hollywood area. It's fairly close to the Hollywood sign. It's probably like a few miles west of the Hollywood sign. It's kind of hard to describe to people that aren't familiar with the layout of the city of LA and the San Fernando Valley and whatnot. But
I just spent some time with a first cousin of mine back in like '75. He was a screenwriter at that time, and he was living on Highland Avenue, which branched off whatever the road is on which the Hollywood Bowl sits. And I've forgotten the name of it, but he was up in the hills someplace on the east side, away from the Hollywood Bowl. But that's all I remember of L.A. And actually, I remember very little what I did out there, thankfully. So that.
The Hollywood Bowl, I think it sits in the Cahuenga Pass, I believe, doesn't it? Which is where the 101 freeway cuts through, and then so it's not far. It's not too far from there. Mm-hmm. It's I don't know.
No, there was just a lot of topography there, and it was in the hills. And I was wondering when I was, I know there is a map, kind of a map. That's associated, well, you have it built in one of your articles about the layout of Laurel Canyon, but for folks who aren't that familiar with it, Laurel Canyon, how would you define it? And to what era would you say it's best associated?
It is, how would I describe it? It's a very sort of secluded, sort of exclusive, almost self-contained sort of neighborhood. It's not actually a city at all. It's a community, I guess you could say, sort of a self-contained community up in the Hollywood Hills that's fairly secluded in that there's really only one road into there, which is Laurel Canyon Boulevard, which cuts through. And Laurel Canyon Boulevard actually carries quite a bit of traffic these days because it's, like I said, it's an easy way to cut through directly from the valley to the west side. But if you get off of Laurel Canyon Boulevard onto any of the little winding side streets that branch off of it, they're pretty much all dead end roads. So once you know, there's only one way in, and then you're just sort of in this maze of winding roads that go nowhere. So once you get actually into the canyon, it's very, very kind of secluded and very self-contained. It has its own little grocery store and its own little boutique shops and various things like that. It has its own elementary school. At one time, it even had its own newspaper, which is where that map came from back in the olden days. So it's this sort of, it's almost, I mean, you go up there and it's all, you feel like you're not even really in LA anymore. I mean, you're up there in this very heavily wooded, very rustic, serene, sort of, mountain setting, sort of a country setting, and it's very easy to forget that you're actually in the city of LA, although you have great views down onto the, commoners down below from up there. But once you get up there, it just seems so far removed from the city itself. I mean, it's almost like you've jumped on a plane and gone to some remote location, because it has its own unique, distinct feel that's separate from the city itself.
Well, now I had asked you to what era that area is most associated with. That's really not a fair question, because that place has always been the place to be, so to speak, from the 20s with I guess the Hollywood film starlets and such, right up through the 60s and 70s, which you deal the most with. But isn't that the reason why, too, that it is a self-contained place? You don't drive through Laurel Canyon. If you're going in there, you're going in there to see somebody. You got business. There's no drive-through. And if those people don't want to come out for whatever reason, they really don't have to.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, the Laurel Canyon grew up with the film industry. It was developed in conjunction with the onset of the movie industry. Yeah, and from the very beginning, that was one of the main the people that flocked to the canyon were a lot of the early movie stars who could get up and have privacy and seclusion. You're out pretty much, in the boonies is the feel of it when you're up there. You feel very far removed from the city, and so it definitely had an attraction for the movie people who wanted, the privacy and the to get away from it all, so to speak. So yeah, it's always been it's always been a favored place for the Hollywood crowd ever since its earliest development back in, like 1913 is when development really first began on it. And right from the beginning, I mean, some of the earliest residents were like Tom Mix, Harry Houdini, Wally Reed, these big name, Ramon Navarro, these big, the big Hollywood icons of that day. And it's been like that ever since. I mean, if you look at every decade since then, you've had people like W.C. Fields and Robert Mitchum, and, in the 50s you had all these young, the young stars like James Dean and Natalie Wood and Dennis Hopper and Sal Mineo, and it's been an exclusive sort of very very upscale retreat for people with money, including the Hollywood crowd, since its inception.
And you do provide a bit of a history, just as you've given us now in that series, but you deal with it mainly as some kind of really epicenter for the 60s and 70s rock and roll scene.
That's when it really, that was kind of Laurel Canyon's heyday, from mid-60s, from like around 1965 through the late 70s up until almost like till 1980. It was just this huge epicenter of music, of this new, the new 60s brand of rock and roll music, beginning with the Byrds and Buffalo Springfield and the Turtles and the Mothers of Invention, the Doors, Love, the Mamas and the Papas, and then from there, which I haven't gotten to in the series yet, but from there, following that first big, batch of bands that came out of there, then it kind of shifted over to like a singer-songwriter kind of thing, and you had James Taylor and Joni Mitchell, Judy Collins, Carole King, Jackson Brown, and then from there, then the next sort of wave was all these like country rock sort of people like America and Flying Burrito Brothers and Poco and the Eagles, and it's an amazing list. If you look at the complete list of all of the singers and songwriters and musicians that emerged from that canyon over like a 10-year period, it's staggering. I mean, it's unbelievable how many people came out of this very small, very isolated little canyon community over the beginning in the mid-60s and onward.
There didn't have to necessarily be anything there of this sort. I'm going to assume that there are no recording studios there, but that place is a hop, skip, and a jump from I would assume Electra Asylum and some other recording studios.
Yeah, it's just above the Sunset Strip, but there wasn't a huge amount of recording studios and whatnot before the big influx of bands. They actually kind of, in a big way, they kind of created the LA music scene and made it what it is today. Made LA the epicenter of the music world. That's one point that I made in the series, is that they weren't coming here because this was the mecca for musicians. They made it that.
Mecca music, right?
All of these Asylum Records was actually started here by David Geffen, who signed up a lot of these people, and a lot of these record companies. They were mostly based in New York at the time, and some of them didn't even have West Coast representatives when this whole scene started to break, and they had to kind of, get people out here to start signing up all these bands. But yeah, there was to some degree there was recording studios and whatnot, but these bands really kind of made the scene what it is today, and a lot of them actually built their own recording studios. Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys built his own, John Phillips built his own, Frank Zappa. A lot of these guys built their own home studios. Mike Nesmith of the Monkees built his own, and So yeah, they really transformed the whole LA music in the whole music industry in general. Because I mean, some of the albums and it ended up coming out of Laurel Canyon. Just I mean, they sold so many copies, and they just completely It was kind of the beginning of the whole corporatization of the music industry with these just huge monster albums that came out, like, you know, Carole King's Tapestry and the Eagles' Hotel California and Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, and just, you know, these just huge monster albums that completely redefined what a hit record was. And, you know, so yeah, it was the music industry in LA really grew up around all of these bands, but there was some facilities to begin with, but
it was more a case that they went ahead and made it the scene, and then the industry followed the scene.
Pretty much so, yeah, because before that, the music scene was basically centered in Nashville, New York, and I'm drawing a blank. Memphis, I think it was.
Oh, with Sun Records.
And LA was just sort of a real a minor player. You know, LA was the movie. You know, they had the Hollywood. They had the motion picture industry pretty much centered here, but the music industry really wasn't until like the late '60s. I just read the other day that prior to that, like in 1963 or something, of the number one songs. Of the songs that hit number one and for that year, like something like 26 of them came out of New York, and like 3 of them came out of L.A. And within like a few years, those numbers had like completely reversed, and L.A. had become by far the dominant music producer, the music capital of the country, of the world, pretty much.
It also seemed to me that one of the places to be seen out there as well, or at least to perform, a club, I guess, that comes up time and time again, is the Troubadour.
Doug Weston's Troubadour, the Whiskey A Go-Go, the London Fog, Pandora's Box, Ciro's. There was a whole
the Losers Club.
Yeah, the Troubadour was one of the big ones. That was the Troubadour is really where the whole country rock movement got started, beginning with Graham Parsons and his Blind Burrito Brothers, and Poco, which was kind of an offshoot of Buffalo Springfield, and, you know, carrying through to the Eagles, who made it this huge, you know, commercial force that it was. Basically what the Eagles did was take this pioneering work done by Graham Parsons and Chris Hillman and others, and turned it into this big, you know, commercial, huge corporate, the huge corporate entity that it now is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in fact, I still remember that there was kind of a protege that was going on, where the Eagles protege Jackson Browne, and Jackson Browne protéged Warren Zevon. You know, and in this thing, I want to tell you also, this is very reminiscent of the liner notes that I read in The Best of Carla Bonoff, when she breaks down how things were going out there, because she was involved with a lot of those same personages, and of course all the main players, if you remember, from the Electro Asylum, I guess you would call stable performers, like Kenny Edwards, you know, and Russ Kunkel and Andrew Gold and all them. And she reminisces about having a $200 a month flat out in San Fernando Valley. So, but in those liner notes, she talks a lot about the same things that you're speaking to, also about how things were back in those days. But there's also something else that's kind of curious as far as commonalities go with rock and roll, with Laurel Canyon, and also with a lot of these stars, rock and roll stars, having been sired by family members, a spouse or so, that was in the military intelligence complex.
Yeah, to an uncanny degree. There's a lot of them there's a lot of sons and daughters of the military intelligence complex running around, and a lot of sons and daughters of families that have an incredible amount of wealth and political power as well. Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, can we ding off a couple of these on the list here? if you don't mind?
Sure. Where do we start?
Well, yeah, I was going to say with Jim Morrison, who nobody would associate with being the prodigy of some heavy military folks. In this case, his father was a big naval guy, was he not?
Yes, he was, and yeah, that's one of the ones that seems to shock a lot of people. I've gotten more responses concerning Morrison than anyone else. He has some very rabid fans who are bound and determined to defend their man, which, I can kind of understand. But yeah, Jim Morrison was the son of a U.S. Naval Admiral, and not just any U.S. Naval Admiral, but the one who was actually in command of the fleet of ships that was involved in the so-called Tonkin Gulf incident, where two of our ships supposedly came under attack from North Vietnamese forces, but later it was basically acknowledged that it never even happened, that they basically made the whole thing up and used that as the pretext to greatly escalate the war. Immediately following that, of course, was the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, which gave the president, pretty much unlimited powers to wage war. And right after that, we began massive bombing campaigns that didn't stop for years. And we almost immediately began shipping the first uniformed ground troops over there. And within a year of that incident, we had 200,000 men already over there in country, more in 1 year than we've built up in over in the Middle East in 5 or 6 years, or however long that nightmare's been going on. So there was just a huge, massive escalation of the war that occurred right after this incident, and the guy that was in command of those ships at that time was Jim Morrison's dad, of all people. Yeah, very odd. Very small world that at the very time that the father's over there, working to create this pretext for a full-scale American immersion into that war, the son's over here positioning himself to become this huge icon of the anti-war movement. Very odd, and he never mentioned throughout his career. In fact, he was fond of telling reporters that his parents were dead, that his family was dead, and which a lot of people have written to me to tell me. They say, well, you say that Jim Morrison never spoke out about his parents, but he used to tell interviewers that he was dead, and the reason that he did that was because he felt that they were dead to him. Symbolically, they were dead to him, and he wanted nothing to do with them. And meanwhile, I'm saying, well, then how come he was sitting on the bridge of his dad's ship, 1 year before his band came out? And have you ever considered that maybe he did that because that was a very convenient way to avoid talking about who his dad really was? If you don't want to talk about who your dad was, you tell people that he's dead, and then you don't have to talk about it, right? So, I don't, I know it upsets a lot of people, but I don't know. And I was a huge Doors fan. I still am to some degree, but I listen to the music in a little different way now, I guess. It's just, I don't know, it's tainted in a way to me now,
Yeah, I understand that completely, and I'll try to get back to the point of what this really says about who these people might really have been, and how much of a coincidence this all is, because the next character of renown that fits into this paradigm is Frank Zappa.
Yeah, Frank Zappa was a hugely influential character in Laurel Cabin. For a while, he occupied the sort of what was sort of a communal house throughout the mid to late 60s, which was Tom Mix's old log cabin, which, despite the name, is not like what you'd expect a log cabin to be. It was actually this huge, massive 5-level former roadhouse/tavern, and which he holed up in for a while, and that was sort of the major gathering spot for Laurel Canyon royalty. I mean, anybody who was anyone stopped by the log cabin, and even though his band was never hugely commercially successful, he was very influential among his peers, and he started up his own record labels and signed up a lot of the bands. You know, a lot of people probably don't realize that he's the one that signed Alice Cooper and launched his career, and you know, some other people as well. So he was a very influential character in the Canyon, and his dad was actually a chemist at the Edgewood Arsenal doing chemical warfare research. Frank actually lived there for like the first 7 years of his life. He lived in military housing on the grounds of the Edgewood Arsenal and attended the Edgewood School. So he was a product of the Edgewood Arsenal, of all places.
Now, wait, is Edgewood Arsenal, is that the one in Maryland?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, outside of Baltimore.
Yep,
yeah, it's
right.
a very infamous facility. It's been the home of U.S. chemical warfare research for decades and decades, and it also comes up rather frequently in like the MK Ultra research. It's been linked repeatedly to various projects and sub-projects of the quote-unquote MK Ultra program. So, yeah, I mean, anybody that's done any conspiracy research at all is pretty much is familiar with the Edgewood Arsenal. So, when you hear that this huge figure in the music community at that time was a direct product of that facility, that definitely sets off some alarm bells for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then there's John Phillips. John Phillips was another hugely influential figure. He was, not only the founder of the Mamas and the Papas, one of the most commercially successful Laurel Canyon bands, but he also co-organized the Monterey Pop Festival and wrote the song that kind of served as the siren song for the Summer of Love that was sung by his buddy Scott McKenzie. The song San Francisco, Be Sure to Wear Flowers in Your Hair was a wretched song, but everybody knows it. So he was a hugely influential character also on the music scene and in sort of disseminating this whole music scene to the rest of the country through the Monterey Pop Festival and drawing people into the Summer of Love and all that. And he's got more military connections than, it's just, his dad was a career Marine Corps officer. He himself attended Annapolis Naval Academy. His first wife, who was a direct descendant of John Adams and John Quincy Adams, worked at the Pentagon. His older sister Rosalind worked at the Pentagon. His brother was a retired Marine with combat experience who became a dirty D.C. area cop. And his mother worked her entire career in some capacity for the federal government. So, everybody around his entire family worked directly for, the military intelligence complex. Everyone but him, supposedly, or that's what we're supposed to believe, that even though, everybody that surrounded this guy was employed by the Defense Department in some capacity, and even though he, attended military academies and graduated from Annapolis and, had all these other strange, biographical details that, we're supposed to believe that he had nothing to do with any of that, which I find a little hard to believe myself, especially when you considering that he's just one of many of the people in Laurel Canyon that had that kind of background. If it was just one or two of these guys, maybe you could overlook it and say, okay, that's a coincidence, or, this guy went into this career because he's rebelling against his parents' values, blah, blah, blah. But when you come up to it time after time after time after time, it kind of gets a little difficult to just sort of, write it off as a coincidence or an aberration or what have you.
Well, that's where I want to go in this as we're approaching the bottom of the hour. And again, folks, this is a good time to just take a departure for a second. We're talking with Dave McGowan. Dave, you want to give the website and how people can find out about not only this series but the past information and articles you've disseminated?
Yeah. The website is www.davesweb.cnchost.com. That's Davesweb, DAVESWEB.CNCHOST.com. Kind of a pain in the butt, but...
That's all right. And for those who can't write that fast, along with the posting of your URL and the link to the audio will be your website as well, so they can click on that. In fact, as they're listening to it now, whenever now should be, they can also hit your website as we speak. So not a problem. But now what's interesting is you have a lot of information up there, but you don't sell a whole lot of things. Is that correct?
I don't sell any. I'm not here to sell anything. No. I mean, I do have 3 books out, but the most recent book that I put out was Program to Kill, which I think was released in 2004. So it's been out there for a while. Still a good book if anybody wants to read it, but no, I'm not. I have nothing to pitch. Unfortunately.
Well, Program to Kill, I think, would you call that your favorite baby? Would that be correct?
That is, that's one of my proudest accomplishments. I really like that book. People have very mixed reactions to it, but of the 3, it's the one that I'm proudest of. Yeah.
And what are the other 2 titles, Dave?
The other 2 titles, one of them goes almost a decade old now. It's hard to believe. I think it was published in '99 or something. Was Derailing Democracy, and then in 2001, I think, was Understanding the F Word. So those are both. Yeah, those are even older ones. So I have nothing. I have nothing new to sell. Just my new series on my website, which is freely available to anyone who wants to venture over and take a look.
And again, we're talking about Inside the LC, the strange but mostly true story of Laurel Canyon and the birth of the hippie generation. And admittedly, you were born in '60. I have 9 years on you, so a lot about what you wrote, I got a chance to, like I said, be a participant in to a certain extent. But for yourself, I mean, not that you had to be born when I was, or even before that, to appreciate that. But you also, now, did you have older siblings that kind of like had music hanging around that you might not have listened to, unless you had somebody older who was playing stuff that you kind of, like that happened with my sister, who's 8 years ahead of me. I mean, I was hearing rock and roll when I was 6 years old, and it kind of like all sank in. Did you have a situation where you had someone older who was into this, and it kind of just by osmosis got into you as well?
A little, not too much. I have 2 older brothers, but we were very, very close. The middle brother is 1 year older than me, and my oldest brother is 2 years older. We're a Catholic family. My mom was just pumping them out. I mean, we were literally like a year apart. I don't know how the hell she even did it.
God bless her, yeah.
She would have had more, but she had problems with delivering me, and the doctors told her she couldn't have any more. She would have pumped out more. But, so I do have 2 older brothers, but not a great deal older. But they were into music a little before me and probably got me into it a little earlier than I would have otherwise. I remember the first concert I went to, I was probably 12 years old, to see Three Dog Night at the Forum, which was interesting, and I was actually going to go with my mother because I wasn't old enough to go alone. And we happened to have an older cousin who was out visiting from Iowa at the time, and I ended up going with this cousin of mine who was like 19 or 20 at the time, which was very cool because it spared me from having to go with my mom.
Yes, right.
So yeah, the first concert I went to, I was very young, and I was shocked that like all these people around us were smoking pot and stuff. I didn't know what the hell was going on. So yeah, that was my first concert, and they were a Laurel Canyon band as well. I left them off the list, but yeah, Three Dog Night was yet another Laurel Canyon band.
Well, I think I got this right, and this is just a little minutia, which you can forget about as soon as it comes out of my mouth, but I think Chuck Negron is a Jersey guy. And if memory serves me correctly, I had a good friend in the Jersey days who lived across the street from his sister during the high point of Three Dog Night, and of course he fell in some hard times, and I think apparently has reinvented himself and is kind of going back out and singing again. But did you? I don't know how deeply you went into. Now you do address Negron and Three Dog Night. Did you find not that this isn't really necessary, but if he had Jersey roots in that?
I can't remember. I think he may have. I'd have to look it up. I know I have it in my notes. He was a basketball star. He was a star athlete, and he was a renowned basketball star. I know that, and I don't remember all the details of his bio.
Well, he got into some bad drug situations, didn't he?
He ended up, I mean, the band was hugely successful. I mean, just massively successful. Just a whole string of hit singles and hit albums, and made tons of money. And then he developed just a major heroin addiction, and went through something like 24 attempts at rehab that all failed, and ended up actually living on the streets, homeless and penniless for a while, and finally cleaned himself up.
Yep.
And I think he's doing better now. Although his son also went through a major ordeal. I don't know how he's doing now, but he definitely fell on hard times and almost ended up bludgeoned in the Wonderland house, according to his own account. According to his own account, he was a regular buyer from that house and had set up a buy that very night, but because he was already trashed, he fell asleep and never made it over, or he might have ended up one of the bodies on the floor of the Wonderland house. He definitely hit some bad times.
So Negron might very well have been in the Wonderland house when Manson's posse descended upon them.
Well, it wasn't Manson. It was actually Eddie Nash's posse in the Wonderland house, and including John Holmes. That's an interesting story in and of itself. But that happened in Laurel Canyon. A lot of people probably don't realize that. Wonderland Avenue runs right through the heart of Laurel Canyon, and it's kind of odd that what is considered to be the most brutal mass murder in L.A. history, occurred in this exclusive, remote, very serene, rustic neighborhood. Played host to the most brutal murder in the city's history.
Now, is that account chronicled in any kind of movie? Was there a movie out there about?
It's a Well, it was fictionalized in Boogie Nights. The incident was sort of fictionalized in the movie Boogie Nights by whatever that guy's name is, the guy that did the...
Marky Mark?
No, I think it's the director. I can't, but it's handled in a much more literal, realistic fashion in a movie called Wonderland with Val Kilmer.
Right.
That gives a few different versions of the crime from different people's perspective, and kind of leaves it to the viewer to decide which one or which combination of ones is the truth. Yeah. So Chuck Negron was a regular visitor there, and his bandmate Danny Hutton lived right down the street. He lived on Wonderland Avenue. A whole bunch of them lived on Wonderland Avenue. That band, did you know that band, by the way, was basically formed by Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys?
No, had no idea. No, not even a connection.
Yeah, it's Danny Hutton was one of his best friends, good buddies. He hung out with Brian all the time, and Brian sort of started them out. It was originally called Redwood, and he recorded their original demos and got the three guys together, Hutton and Negron and Corey Wells. And he was the original driving force behind Three Dog Night. Strangely enough, was Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys.
Well, that's another whole story too with the Beach Boys, and I won't go into that right now, but
yeah, Dennis Wilson. And,
yeah, and then Brian Free, frying his brain for the most part, and some of the stuff they were involved with, and there's another character in there too, Terry Melcher, right? Isn't that Doris Day's son?
Terry Melcher, he was a big player in the Laurel Canyon scene. Yeah, he produced the Byrds, the first big Laurel Canyon band. He produced a lot of the albums that came out of there, and was closely associated with a lot of these musicians. Good buddy with Dennis Wilson, him and Wilson and Greg Jacobson, his right-hand man, who was married to the daughter of Lou Costello, the old-time comedian. And they were, the three of them, Wilson and Melcher and Jacobson, were major players in a lot of this stuff. And they called themselves the Golden Penetrators, by the way. That was the nickname that the three of them gave themselves. And I'll leave it to your listeners to figure out why.
Well, that's right up there with the Honey Drippers. So
but the three of them, and of course their fourth buddy, Charlie Manson, who was very much a part of the whole scene. And was very close to Melcher and Wilson, and lived with Wilson for the summer of '68, and had visited the Cielo Drive house with Terry Melcher, who lived there before Polanski and Tate, and that whole. I haven't really got into too much of that yet, but that's a whole other thread that runs through this story. Is the whole Charlie Manson angle and all of the people that he was connected to, and particularly Melcher and Wilson.
Okay. Also, that number is very large among the Laurel Canyon alumni. Are two very heavy hitters who joined together but came from different beginnings. And let's take them one at a time. First, the two of them were Stephen Stills and then David Crosby. But let's take Stephen Stills first. That's another an aha about where he comes from.
Yeah, according to what I've read, and I've had a little more trouble digging up biographical details on him than some of the other guys, but from what I've gathered, his father was a career military. He grew up basically in Texas, but his father spent a considerable amount of time in Central America, Panama Canal Zone, El Salvador, Costa Rica, various other places. And, of course, as everyone knows, Central America has been a hotspot of covert intelligence and military operations for as long as anybody can remember. And that's where his pop spent, a lot of his time down there. And occasionally Stephen would go down there with him, and he attended military academies and schools on military bases and whatnot. And basically he had the same sort of military brat upbringing that all the rest of these guys did. He was surrounded by military and intelligence types, and attended military schools and came from a military family and yada yada yada. And he also, one of the most interesting parts about the Stephen Stills story is that later on, he used to tell people that he had served a term of duty over in Vietnam, which is universally dismissed. Every time you see it in the literature, it's immediately followed by a dismissal that was just a drug-fueled delusion that he had, and it couldn't have actually happened because he showed up on the Laurel Canyon scene at the very time that the first uniformed troops were arriving in Vietnam, and he remained in the public spotlight for the rest of his life. So obviously he couldn't have served a term of duty. But what all of these people ignore, deliberately or otherwise, is that we had people there from at least 1961 on, hundreds of quote-unquote advisors who were actually, CIA Special Forces personnel over there, doing their thing covertly before we introduced ground troops. And, given his background, his family background and whatnot, it's entirely possible that he that he could have been, served some time over in Vietnam, in the early days, back before we, before we were openly engaged in Vietnam. He very well could have, and that's what he told people. And of course, nobody wanted to believe it. But to me, it's entirely feasible that he could very well have done that. So that's Stephen Stills. David Crosby is an interesting character. He is also the son of a military intelligence guy, World War II military intelligence guy, Floyd Delafield Crosby. But beyond that, he's also, his full name is actually David McCortland Crosby, and he's actually the offspring of these three sort of very closely intermarried, intertwined families, the Van Rensselaer, Van Cortlandt, and Van Schuler families, which, if you look them up, has produced just this whole slew of important people. I mean, just Navy admirals, generals, Supreme Court justices, federal judges, U.S. senators, congressmen, state senators, governors. This family has occupied every conceivable position of power in the political and legal realms since the founding of the country. And he's also a direct descendant of both John Jay and Alexander Hamilton.
But also, Dave, I tell you, those families that you mentioned, Van Rensselaer, Van Schuyler, Van Cortlandt, along with Roosevelt, they comprise what we call, the East Bank families that go back to the beginning Dutch patroons along the Hudson River. I mean, those names are all there to be seen to this day. Rensselaer, is a county in New York, and Van Cortlandt. Rockefeller's place is now also up in that area.
Yeah, those names are all over the place. I didn't realize it till I started looking into it. But yeah, there's a Van Cortlandt Park in New York. There's a Van Rensselaer Hotel. Those names are attached to all kinds of parks and public buildings, and the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and they're everywhere.
Oh, but that's reminiscent, though. I mean, of the rich Dutch that were here, obviously, and finally gave way to the British. But like I said, that whole East Bank is just rife with their. You can go there and go on their estates, and also another one that's involved in that is Vanderbilt. So that was some kind of neighborhood on the east side of the Hudson River, and that extends right up through that Albany area, where again, where Rensselaer County is, and also Rensselaer Institute. So that's some family to be hooked into, and Crosby's in that bloodline, is he not?
Yeah, absolutely. He carries the name. He's definitely in the line of descent of that family. Absolutely, yeah. And and there were others as well. I mean, one of the other names on the scene who never made it as big as some of these other people that we're talking about, but he was very much on the scene, was Ned Doheny, who was an offspring of the Doheny clan, the oil family that. For those of you who've seen the movie There Will Be Blood, the book that's based on oil was actually inspired by senior Ned Doheny. And so the homicidal Daniel Plainview character is actually based on Ned Doheny, and it's a very extremely wealthy family. They built what, back in, I think, the 1920s, they built the Greystone Estate, which is said to be the most expensive private residence ever built in Los Angeles County. This is hugely wealthy family, wealthy and powerful family, and one of their offspring, Ned Doheny, was another member of the Laurel Canyon crowd. And Graham Parsons also, his family owned something like a third of all the citrus groves in Florida and Georgia. It was just massively wealthy family. And he was another member of the Laurel Canyon royalty. So if you go down the line, that's what you find. You find either military intelligence background or just these just hugely wealthy and powerful families, or both.
Yeah, but Graham Parsons too. That was such a strange episode with him upon his death.
Oh, that was just, very bizarre with the whole Manson connection through Phil Kaufman, and that was...
Oh, well, even the way to dispose of his body, if you remember, that nearly got a whole bunch of other rock and rollers indicted, when they burned his body out in the desert.
Yeah, they kidnapped his body, I don't know if kidnapped is the right word, stole his body, whatever it is.
Well, they said they were executing, bad choice of words, his wishes to be cremated in the desert.
Supposedly, yeah, and the whole story is just weird because he was under like LAPD guard, and these two disreputable characters, Phil Kaufman, I don't remember who the other one, pull up in like this beat up old hearse that they had gotten somewhere with like broken windows and all that, and just supposedly just snatched this body like right out from under the nose of the LAPD, and then took it out to Joshua Tree. And, ritually burned it, like on the summer solstice or the equinox or some such thing. All masterminded by Phil Kaufman, who was the Graham Parsons road manager. But before that, he was a buddy of Charles Manson's in Terminal Island Prison. And later in the canyons, he hooked up with him again later. When they both got out of prison. Manson got out in 67 and Kaufman in 68. And, and this guy, this ex-con friend of Charlie Manson somehow managed to become the road manager for, like, the Rolling Stones and the Flying Burrito Brothers and all these other bands.
I know, it never ends.
Which is kind of, what the hell was that guy even do,
Well,
but he's the one that snatched Parsons' body and took it out and burned it. Which was just one of many weird deaths in the Parsons family, by the way. The entire family seems to have gotten bumped off over the years, one at a time. So,
also, Graham Parsons is forgotten for the most part because he really wasn't on the tip of tongues back in the 70s either. But those of us who remember him as a seminal member of the Flying Burrito Brothers, which spawned off, so many artists that went into other groups. Rick Roberts with Firefall, Bernie Leadon, it goes on and on and on.
Oh, yeah. He was right on the cutting edge even before that, with his International Submarine Band, which was the band that he had when he first showed up in Laurel Canyon, and then that one disbanded and partially reformed as the Flying Burrito Brothers, along with, Hillman from the Byrds, and Bernie Leadon, who would go on to the Eagles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the sound that he came up with he was hugely influential on the Rolling Stones too, in their country phase. The country honk and.
Hence the song that he does is a tribute to them, Wild Horses, right?
Yeah, he actually recorded Wild Horses before they did. It was actually released on his album before the Stones did their own version of it. And although it's credited to Jagger and Richards, it's pretty well. Assume that Parsons had a major role in writing that, as well as some of their other country-influenced songs that they had on whichever, I don't know, was it Beggar's Banquet, or I don't know, one of their albums was really heavily country-influenced. And that was due to Parsons, and the Eagles' entire career was was based on taking what Parsons did and commercializing it, basically.
In fact, I think you could say that Parsons was a founding father of country rock, and also he saluted somewhat in the Eagles song "Hickory Wind" that's on the Border album.
Oh, did they record Hickory Wind?
Yes, they did, and that's all about Parsons, because when I came into this in 73, I believe Parsons had already died. Well, of course he had died, and I had no idea, and somebody said, no, that's where it all starts. When you listen to that song, they're talking about Graham Parsons, and that's the person who birthed all this. There'd be no Eagles without Parsons.
No, there would be no. There probably would have been no Jackson Browne.
Right.
A lot of these, that whole sort of country rock movement that came out of that. Yeah, he spearheaded that whole thing pretty much.
What I want to do is, we only have about 5 minutes left, and I won't go into any more personages, and we've really just touched upon that first part of the 4 parts you have right up on the website right now. Again, the series is called Inside the LC, The Strange But Mostly True Story of Laurel Canyon and the Birth of the Hippie Generation. But I want to ask you an outro question. You can have the rest of the time to go ahead, if you don't mind. We're hoping to see you back perhaps in a week or two, Dave. But, you know, when you look at these people, I'm going to play devil's advocate, another bad choice of words, but when you look at these individuals who come out of families who have a foot in heavily, if not both, into military intelligence work, whatever, government, now, if there's a conspiracy, I'm going to deal with that perhaps when we talk to you again. But I'm just going to ask you, is there a chance that obviously these individuals, these offspring of military government types, probably have some really good genetic material, a decent IQ? Could it be that they just, with their gifts, rebelled against mom and dad and went off on this thing? And I'll just leave it right there, because then there's other things we can talk about in another interview. What's the chances that they're just really gifted, had the best of the best, and chose perhaps to, and of course, obviously they had to have a musical inclination, otherwise this would not even, we wouldn't be talking about them.
Yeah.
What's the chances that they just said, you know, I mean, they're gifted, but mom and dad, I think you suck, and I'm going to do this?
I think if it was just in a few cases, I think that there would be pretty good odds that was what was at play here. And in some of these cases, a few of the cases that may be what is at play. But it's very hard for me to believe that so many of them could have the same background and that they could all just sort of magically come together in this one little remote spot perched in the hills above L.A., especially considering that a huge number of them came from the Washington, D.C. area. I mean, just an uncanny number of them came directly from the D.C. area. And it's very difficult for me to believe that it's just sheerly coincidence that all of these people just happen to come together in this one little isolated place, and almost all of them happen to have the same sort of the same background if you dig deep enough. And there's no doubt that a lot of them were talented. I mean, I've been a huge fan of the music for a very long time, and I mean, to me, there's nobody who's ever picked up the instrument can play the guitar better than Jimi Hendrix, and nobody's ever matched the raw power and emotion of Janis Joplin's vocals, and on and on and on. I mean, Frank Zappa was. I'm not a huge fan of his music, but I can recognize that he was a incredibly talented musician and composer. So they definitely did have talent. I mean, it wasn't that they were just sort of put in this position because of their backgrounds. I mean, they did have the talent to back it up. There's no doubt about that. But my question is, were they the only ones? I mean, was there nobody else? Was there no just average Joes out there in the country that had this, that had the talent and the ambition to succeed, or was it only the people that had the connections who got the lucrative contracts and all the heavy promotion from the record labels and the radio stations and whatnot?
Well, I tell you what, of course, I have to agree with you, and we'll get into that in a second interview if we could. But I at least wanted to throw that out there, because I guess that's what some debunkers would say. It's just like, hey, you have this strain of rather high-quality genetic material, and they're going to do what they're going to do. But I don't think you and I believe that at all.
I don't believe that. Yeah, I mean, we talked about Graham Parsons a little bit. He also, his dad was a military officer, and he attended, military academies, and in the last few years of his life, when he went solo, his main collaborator was Emmylou Harris. That's who he worked with on his two acclaimed solo albums, and she was also the daughter of a career Marine Corps officer. And she grew up in Woodbridge, Virginia, which is home to the Harry Diamond Labs Woodbridge facility, this big huge military research and development facility that just dominates the town that she grew up in.
Well,
familiar with that, by the way?
Oh, yeah, and I mean, and Emmylou, Grievous Angel, she was involved in that, I believe. I'm not sure. Is that right? I don't know. But Emmylou Harris, don't say it's not true, not Emmylou Harris. I know. And well, I'll tell you real quick.
Do you know anything about that Woodbridge facility? I looked it up. I'd never heard of it before, but it's one of the things when I find out where these people were born, I look it up on MapQuest and see what the hell.
I'll tell you what. Honest to goodness, when I was in the bureau in the FBI, and I didn't last long, we were just all young guys then. Woodbridge was talked about, and what's interesting also, as an aside, is that Woodbridge also had a kick and bluegrass station that on the FM dial, which I listen to all the time. But everything in and around Virginia. I mean, Reston and Herndon and Woodbridge and Quantico and all that. I mean, the place is just crawling. It's like Spook Central. I mean,
and that's where most of these. I mean, if you look, that's where most of these people came from. I mean, Morrison, Cass Elliott, and John Phillips all went to high school in Alexandria. Just on and on and on. Zappa was just right nearby there, and just outside of Baltimore. And Tim Buckley, and it just goes. One of the Monkees was. I mean, it's just amazing how many of these people came out of the Virginia suburbs lining Washington D.C. Just time after time after time.
When you go to the store, and actually during those days in the bureau, I lived both in Alexandria, the Rose Hill section, and then moved up to. I didn't like Virginia at all, and I don't think they liked me. And I moved up to Laurel, Maryland, where not Rockefeller. What's his name? George. Wallace got popped. We used to go shopping in the area where he was assassinated. Of course, he didn't die. But anyway, that whole section there, when you go up to somebody there and you're dealing with someone, you never know who you're talking to. Even if you're in the 7-Eleven, you just never know who anybody is because that place is so rife, with military and intelligence type and government type. So, nobody who is who they seem they are. And you got to be really careful, or like myself, not be, and then you don't stay very long in the bureau.
Yeah.
So
Norfolk is a popular place also. There's a lot of these people lived in or around Norfolk, Virginia, which I guess is the home of the world's largest naval base.
That's right. Oh yeah. Listen,
I mean that whole area around there is and yet they all ended up on the other side of the country in this isolated little community up above in the hills above LA, and a huge proportion of them came right from that area that you're talking about, from Arlington, Alexandria, Norfolk, that whole beltway or whatever they call it there. I've never actually been to the East Coast, so I'm not that. I only know what I see on the maps.
Well, all those communities are outside the Beltway for sure, but I mean, it's just loaded. I mean, you talked about Edgewood, which anybody driving down 95 will. I don't know if it's the signs are still there, but I mean, it said there was an Edgewood Arsenal on 95, and then also when I lived in Laurel, I wasn't that far away from guess where, Fort Meade, and that legacy. So I mean, it's just a different place. But it's so interesting that some of these and a good deal of these rock and roll personages were spun out and wound up in the complete opposite area from where they had been. And that's from the East Coast to the West Coast and to L.A. and also up into San Francisco. And I'm thinking of another name, too. I don't think it's associated with Laurel Canyon, but I mean, John Denver, was he not also a military brat whose name was Dusseldorf?
I believe he was. I haven't really looked into that because it's not directly related. But
Laurel Canyon, right?
Yeah, I believe he was, and of course, there's been questions raised about his death as well. And we didn't even get into that in this hour about just this phenomenal number of these people or people closely connected to these people who died these very curious deaths at a very young age. It's astounding how many of these people weren't with us very long.
No, didn't live to full bloom.
Not even close.
No,
I mean they were just dropping like flies. It's uncanny.
And also, we'll get into that in another interview if you wish. But it got to be so actually frequent that we kind of like, how should I say, sardonically kidded around about who would we nominate for the all-time Dead band? And, and I don't mean Grateful Dead. I mean, it was just like there was just somebody dropping off. I mean, like, so what's Heaven's band? In fact, I think, who was that? Bill Medley did a song about that, about all the people who had died, and would be up in heaven or wherever they go and play. But, yeah, I mean, it was just like, what's going on? And that whole era, I mean, you were, probably, 8 to 10 years old. But, I mean, we had just gotten out of high school, and we're looking at all this completely crazy stuff. But it's, I mean, between bombings on campuses, and, of course, Kent State had happened, Woodstock wasn't bad, Monterey did not work out well, and all these deaths.
Altamont.
Altamont is the one that's most infamous, right?
Yeah.
It is in Monterey, you got that right. And, we just sat there and we watched all this stuff, and it's amazing how a young person just kind of assimilates this or makes some kind of sense or just blocks it off in a compartment of their mind. Because when I look back at that, if that were happening today, who knows? And we may see that happen. But back there, I don't know how we made sense of it unless we just ignored it and tried to go on with our lives, because I don't think there was a crazier time than the mid-'60s and the mid-'70s.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was. There were just people dropping left and right, especially the Laurel Canyon crowd, and the Manson murders were just, which were very closely connected to the Laurel Canyon scene, were just really just the tip of the iceberg. There was just, I mean, there was 2 girls' bodies dumped in Laurel Canyon in the late 60s, I think in 1969, 2 of them in 1 year that were just dumped basically in the brush on the side of the road. One of them, the daughter of a intelligence operative, of course, and the other one never identified. And I mean, there were just bodies turning up everywhere, just not just of the rich and famous, like, Hendrix and Joplin and Morrison and Parsons, but, a lot of other people connected to the scene, the girlfriends of both David Crosby and Graham Nash, Jackson Brown's wife, and, I mean, just on and on and on and on. It's just uncanny.
And uncanny is definitely the best word we can use for that, but it was strange and very strange, and to this day, it exists as the same. All right, Dave, listen, thanks for the time that you spent with us. Again, we're talking with Dave McGowan. The website is davesweb.cnchost.com. That link will be up next to the audio, no big deal. The series we're talking about is Inside the LC, the strange but mostly true story of Laurel Canyon and the birth of the hippie generation. What? Are you laughing there?
I was laughing. The title derives from the fact that when you're looking at anything concerning Hollywood, it is very, very difficult to sort out fact from legend. Hence the title, The Strange But Mostly True. Because I mean, I don't know if you've ever dove into the dirt of Hollywood, but man, it is just it's not easy to navigate through. There's just so much, or so many legends and myths, and trying to figure out, and a lot of stuff that is true that is written off as legend and myth, to divert attention away from it, and some stuff that really is legend and myth, and it's very hard to sort out the truth from the fantasy when you're dealing with Hollywood, because everything's a friggin' fantasy in Hollywood.
Well, they named it after the wood of the holly, which was a favorite wood used by the magicians for their wands. So, I think the naming of that part of L.A. is not unintentional. Let's put it that way.
I didn't know that. It's interesting.
Yeah, well, there's one down in Florida, too, and somebody said, so what does that mean? But apparently Hollywood, Florida was supposed to be the film capital east, which never happened. So there was an idea to do the same thing out in California that they did here, and they hence the name Hollywood. So, but yeah, it comes from the wood of the holly, which was the Druids' wand's composition.
Well, that is appropriate then.
Oh, it certainly is. And so, and also reminds you, too, of like the movie Chinatown at the end. Although it's not a Hollywood thing, it's an L.A. thing based on fact with the water wars. And, of course, when they had the last scene, the cop tells Nicholson, Jake, it's Chinatown.
Yeah.
Nothing makes sense. Don't try to.
Well, he was a big part of the Laurel Canyon scene, too. I haven't even got into all that yet. The whole Young Turks angle with, Peter Fonda and Hopper and Bruce Dern and Jack Nicholson and Warren Beatty and all these guys. They were a big part of that scene as well.
Yeah. No, and you're getting there, and we won't jump ahead of you. So,
with Easy Rider and The Trip and all of that. You remember all the stupid exploitation movies?
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of people probably don't know that Jack Nicholson actually wrote the screenplay for The Trip about an LSD trip, and also wrote the screenplay for the Monkees movie Head. Strangely enough.
Well, I was going to go there, and strangely enough, if you look real close, when they had that restaurant scene, who's being ushered out of the restaurant but Jack Nicholson?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he had a cameo in that. I think Hopper did too.
Hopper, right? Hopper was also with him.
All of these people were very closely intertwined. The music scene with the sort of young Hollywood scene, and yeah, it was all just one big happy family living there in the canyons. All the sons and daughters of the military intelligence complex running around bumping each other off, which, if that's what they want to do, it's none of my business, I guess.
Well, I tell you what, with this, you've opened up a can of worms, but I tell you what, it's certainly an interesting can of worms, and we're not done with it by any means. So thanks for delving into that area, and who knows where this is going to lead. As you said, it has many, many tentacles. And hopefully you'll come back in a week or so. Is that all right, Dave?
Oh, yeah, definitely, yeah.
All right, listen, thanks for being with us on this weekend, and you take care of yourself, and look forward to talking to you soon.
Okay, you too, thanks.
All right, bye-bye, Dave.
Bye.